This is a spring scene paint-along. I've been to paint-alongs before, the ones where you all get together and you have a teacher at the front of the room and everyone eats cupcakes and paints the same thing. But I'm not good at those because they were doing some sort of pretty lovebird sunset scene, and I ended up making some sort of weird vortexy nightmare. So I'm not very good at following directions. And the thing is that you don't really need to be following directions exactly. What I'm here for is to give you the basic stepping stones of how to start a project. And then after I give you those concepts, I want you to take it wherever you need to that makes sense for you and make it your own. So for this, you just need acrylics, you need a canvas, and you just need your brushes and water. For paints, you really don't need that many colors. As long as you have your primaries, you'll be fine. And white. White's really important. So your primaries, your red, yellow, blue, and your white. You can make whatever you need to from that. All right, so I will give you the ideas and you will take it from there. So I hope you can make something beautiful and something that really reflects you as an artist. All right, have fun. So before you start painting, we want to get some drawing ideas down. Give yourself a few rectangles, and these are thumbnails. Now I know I want a rabbit in my painting, and I know I want flowers in my painting, and those might be the main focus. But I do also have to plan out where my sky and my ground are. It's really important to establish your horizon line so you know where the bunny's actually sitting. So now I'm just going to plan out a few compositions. They don't have to be really pretty right now. You can draw like the weirdest looking rabbit ever. It just needs to have a general shape. You can see I put a horizon line in. Above that's going to be sky, below that's going to be ground. After that, just plan out some ideas of where you want to put flowers. Vary it up. Maybe you want your bunny closer, or maybe you want the bunny farther away. This is just getting all your ideas out right now. Making thumbnails is a really useful practice to get into because it kind of gets you trying out different things and having ideas that maybe you wouldn't have thought of when you're doodling like this. And that way, when it comes time to draw on the canvas, you have a really good firm plan in place. After that, this is how we're going to draw a very simple bunny. There is a circle for the head, and then you give it ears. And those are really tiny ears. You can have a tiny eared bunny, or you can give it really big ears. It's up to you. I'm going to make a really big eared bunny. After that, you want two circles for its little cheeks, and you can put those near the bottom, and your nose will go right in between that. For the body, just some lines down. It doesn't matter right now because we're going to hide the bunny with some grass later on. We're kind of cheating here. Then just give it its eyes. You can do teeny little beady eyes, or you can make them a little bigger. This is your bunny. I already did a tutorial on spring flowers, so you can just use those flowers in your composition. After all that planning, this is the composition I ended up with. I did a whole bunch of flowers both in front of and behind the bunny. Right, let's get painting. I'm using a paper plate for a palette and a bunch of different brushes. I have some smalls and some mediums. For paint, I'm just using really basic, cheap craft store paint, which I like using, and this is what I happen to have around. I couldn't go to the store and buy more right now. Now, when we plan a painting, we want to work backwards to forwards. So think about what's behind and what's in front, and start with what's behind. I can pretty much guarantee that for all of our paintings, the sky's the furthest thing away. So mix yourself up a good sky color by mixing your blue with your white, and give that whole background just a really good coat. I'm using a medium-sized brush and then switching to a smaller brush when I get into the tiny spaces in between flowers. Do your best to paint around the shapes, but it's okay if you get some on top of the spaces. We'll cover them up later. While acrylic paint's wet, you can blend to change the colors a little. So I blended in some white near the bottom and some darker blue to the top. And then I came in with cotton balls and gave myself some fluffy clouds. The next part that's further behind is the grass. So it's behind the bunny and the flowers, but still in front of the sky. So I'm going to mix up a nice pale green for the grass color. I want it to be pale because I want the leaves of the flowers in front of it to stand out against and be a little brighter. You want that contrast there. And with a brush that's pretty dry, You can drag that paint upward to make it look like grass. You don't want a ton of paint, you just want a fairly dry brush for this part. Just flick that brush upwards into the sky. Next, I'm going to be doing my tulip leaves. Tulip leaves are pretty bluish green, so you can mix up your yellow and blue with a little heavier blue. I'm going to make a darker version and a lighter version, so just make yourself a nice green and then add some white to it to make a light green. We're going to use that light green and give all of those leaves a nice big coat for the tulips. We'll be getting back to the darker green later, but we need to let this first coat of those leaves dry. And while they dry, we're going to move on to the tulip flowers. So I just used the red straight out of the bottle, and then I added some yellow to make a darker orange. I want the contrast in that red and orange to make things stand out. So the behind petals are going to be the red, and the forward petals are going to be the dark orange, and you can see how that gives them a little more of a shape. I let the flowers dry, and then I did give them a second coat of the same colors just to make them a little more, get rid of some of the brush strokes. This next step is going to add some contrast to your tulip leaves. You can redraw this part if it makes it a little easier. So this is why we mixed a darker version of our leaf color for our tulips. We're going to be using that darker green to give form back to these leaves and stems. So you can see as I add this darker green, the stems of the tulips, they're reappearing because they have that contrast between the dark and the light. And we're getting a lot more form to those leaves, some turning, some shadows, some lights. That contrast is very important when painting, especially if you want some realism. After that, I just kind of touched up my tulips a little with a dry brush, brushed in some yellow for some highlights on the orange, and I mixed kind of a dark purpley color. And you can see again that that kind of makes some contrast in darks and lights and separates the petals. I'm using all these colors so you can see that they're distinct petals on a tulip. Tulips have 6 petals total. We may only see 3 of them right now on each of these, but instead of painting all of them the same red and letting them blend together, by adding highlights and shadows in different colors, I can make them all very distinct from each other, and it makes the flower more interesting. The bunny is the next layer for me, and this is the fun part where I just take all the paint on the palette and mix it together to make brown. And I want 2 shades of brown, so mix up a good brown and then add white. So I'm just going to give the ears a nice coat of the pale brown, and then the face. And underneath the face, I want there to be a dark because I need a separation between the bunny and its body. So I'm going to do the dark, and then I'm going to blend in some of that light brown from the bottom up. Again, while acrylic is wet, you can blend it all together really well. I also brought a little bit of dark brown around the sides of the face and up the ears, and that gives a little more of a shape to it. You don't have to do that. You can just paint flat colors if you want to. I then mixed up an even darker kind of brown by using red and blue to make a purple and adding just a little bit of yellow to make it a little more brown. I brought that dark color underneath the chin again, a little more, and then I came in and I added a little more white with a dry brush. When you use a dry brush, it's going to make it look like fur. You're going to get really scratchy marks that look like fur. The cheeks got a coating of white, the inside of the ears got pink, and the nose got pink as well. And I'm going to slow this down for a second so you can see more detail work. With a tiny brush, I used that dark brown, and I'm adding just a little more contrast. Contrast is what gives form. I'm adding it around the nose and around the inside of the ears, and you can see how it's really helping that pop out and look a little more three-dimensional and a little less flat. So these are the very important things to be thinking of. How can you make things look a little more three-dimensional? How can you give texture? And then I did add a little more white too, just for more fuzzy texture. The last part is adding the eyes. I just used my dark brown because I don't have any black. Womp womp. You can use black if you have it. The snowdrops are my next layer, and they're just plain white. Straight up white. Super simple. I mixed myself a green for the stems of these. And again, it's just the same blue and yellow, but this time heavier yellow. The tulips were a little bit of more bluish green. This is going to be a yellowy green. So you can see how just mixing up different ratios of yellow and blue gives you such different colors. And that's what we want. We want variety. That's what's going to keep things separate from each other instead of just looking like one big green pile of foliage and petals. Or leaves. Yeah, leaves are green. Petals are different colors. I know my botany. The flower that is closest to the front is my crocus. And I'm going to mix up a purple with my red and blue plus white, and then I made one that was a little more blue and one that was a little more red. So I have a little bit of difference in my purples. And you can see why working in these backward to forward layers is great, because I can just be plopping things on top of each other instead of painting around things. And acrylic covers great, so it works perfectly. While the crocus dried, really quickly in there I added some pale yellow to separate the snowdrop petals from each other. And then I added some darker purple to separate the crocus petals. Remember, we're mixing up little variations of the colors so we can get contrast here and get some details going. So just like we added some darks to the tulip leaves and some different colors to the tulip flowers, we're doing the same thing for the rest of these flowers. I also dry brushed in a little bit of white for some highlights on them. For the crocus leaves, I mixed up a darker green, which is just blue yellow with a tiny bit of red, and that'll make it a little darker. And I added no white to that one at all. You can see it stands out really nice against everything else. So the bottom of the painting is still a little messy, so what I'm going to do is just add a ton of grass to the foreground of this painting. What that is just going to be a green. I just added mostly a little white to the crocus leaf color. And I'm going to take my brush and stroke upwards from the bottom. As you stroke upward, the brush is going to run out of paint and it'll give you that nice grass-like texture to it. I'm just going to do that in a whole big area across the bottom. And I'm also going to bring in some yellow over top of it and get some nice blending there while it's wet. So you can see that this is kind of bringing everything together. And yeah, so you have this nice solid foreground, and this is a close-up so you can see all that grassy texture that gets in by blending in yellow. I'm putting the middle of the crocus in bright yellow, and the last thing is the two highlights in the bunny's eyes, and then you are done. The important things to remember are work backwards to forwards to get your layers right, vary your values, your lights and darks, vary your colors, and vary your brush strokes as well. Try blending while it's wet and using a dry brush for texture. I added colored pencils on mine afterwards because I like how it looks. So think about how you can customize yours and really make it your own. Markers, colored pencils, even regular pencils work on top of acrylics.